This is the USS Gerald R. Ford. It costs a whopping $13 billion to create and is considered the greatest aircraft carrier ever made. With its crew of more than 4,500 sailors, advanced weaponry, and expensive features, buying one of these warships is not the only thing you need to worry about. At an operating cost that's enough to buy your own private island, a United States aircraft carrier is one of the most expensive things that no one can own. But why does it have such a massive cost? And how is this astronomical figure broken down? This is what it costs to operate a United States aircraft carrier. Before we can even think to look at the daily operational costs of this beast, it is important to understand why it costs nearly $7 million per day. To better understand this, it is important to look at the development and construction of the vessel. On September 10, 2008, the United States Navy signed a $5.1 billion contract with Northrop Grumman Shipbuilding in Newport News, Virginia. This followed an initial budget of $2.7 billion paid to the defense contractor for the advanced building of the carrier in 2005. Initially, it was slated to be completed in 2013, with the Navy taking delivery of the vessel in 2015. But after running into several hurdles, the deadline was pushed back to 2016. The idea was to make this the most advanced naval warship, also focusing on advanced technology improvements that could potentially reduce the overall cost of maintaining the vessel. But things got a little tricky, and by 2013, the estimated cost of production already sat at $12.8 billion, not including the more than $4 billion Northrop Grumman received for the research and development. This already put the vessel about 22% over the initial estimated budget proposed in 2008 under the Obama administration. Moreover, then Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Jonathan Greenert also suggested that there might be a delay in construction of about 2 years as the U.S. Navy faced severe budget constraints. Kind of ironic judging by the budget they had already received. Nevertheless, the Navy eventually took possession of the USS Gerald R. Ford on May 31, 2017, and it was officially commissioned just a few months later on July 22. But the Navy again ran into problems. This time it was issues with the nuclear propulsion and munitions elevator, which would later add another $200 million to the costs. By the time it was all said and done, the USS Gerald R. Ford would cost the United States Navy a massive $13.027 billion, officially making it the world's most expensive warship ever built. This was almost double the cost of the newer Nimitz-class carriers, such as the USS Ronald Reagan, which was $6.2 billion, and nearly 3 times as expensive as the USS Nimitz, which cost about $4.5 billion. Since many of these Nimitz-class carriers are still considered some of the best in the world, it automatically begs the question of why the U.S. Navy decided to build such a warship. Before we move on, we'd like to encourage you to like this video, and please subscribe to our channel as we aim to improve and create the best Navy videos on the web. To gain a better understanding of where these costs originate from, it is essential that we have a closer look at the differences between the Nimitz-class and Ford-class aircraft carriers. Keep in mind that depending on the specific vessel, there could be other differences. So for the purpose of this video, we will be comparing the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS Gerald R. Ford. First of all, there is the displacement, with both vessels having about 100,000 tons of displacement. The Reagan is slightly shorter at 1,093 feet, while the Ford is an even 1,100 feet in overall length. Both have a functional airfield and can hold close to 100 aircraft, since many of the fighters can be stored within the vessel itself. 2 nuclear reactors and 4 shafts power the Reagan, whereas the Ford uses the slightly newer 2 Bechtel A-1B nuclear reactors. One of the first major differences can be seen on the flight deck, as the Reagan still operates using a traditional steam catapult, while the Ford uses the more advanced electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS. But what truly sets the Ford class apart from the USS Ronald Reagan is the additional features. In fact, the Reagan features a slightly bigger crew, often eclipsing 5,000 sailors. Meanwhile, just about 4,500 sailors are needed to operate the bigger and more advanced Gerald R. Ford. The main reason for this lies in how the Ford is constructed, which also significantly contributes to why it has such an expensive price tag for development. In terms of the Ford, most of the ship is fully automated. For example, trash is now discarded by a highly advanced incinerator, whereas the Reagan still relies on traditional methods that require trash to be fired into the ocean. But this is only one of many different features that make the Ford more advanced and stand apart from the other Nimitz-class vessels. Adding to the initial costs is also the new and advanced radar system. For the Gerald R. Ford, the Navy demanded only the best and the latest technology. The DBR, or dual-band radar system, adopted by the Gerald Ford, is a significant upgrade over the AN/SPY, 3X-band radar system adopted by the Reagan. Unfortunately, the cost differences between these two radar systems cannot be precisely measured, but it is likely that considering the development of the newer system, it is fairly expensive. Then there is the issue of materials. The USS Gerald R. Ford features far more sophisticated materials, specifically designed to enhance stealth and prevent the vessel from being detected by enemy radar. Not only does it have an angular design, specifically chosen to scatter radar signals, but it also features radar-absorbing materials, which don't send back a signal at all. One of the only differences between the vessel and a stealth bomber is perhaps the fact that the USS Gerald R. Ford doesn't have a stealth coating. Finally, it is all about weaponry, but this can be changed and integrated whenever a vessel is taken out for service. Currently, Gerald R. Ford has the most advanced and sophisticated weapon system, which is not surprising given the fact that survivability was one of the main focal points during the design process. Essentially, all of these features combine to make the USS Gerald R. Ford the most expensive naval warship in the world. But despite the Navy paying a whopping $13 billion for its construction, it is estimated that the daily operating costs of this carrier are about $7 million per day. Yes, you heard that correctly. It costs $7 million per day to operate this amazing marvel of U.S. engineering. So, why does it cost this much, and how is it broken down? First of all, there is the number of sailors aboard the vessel. For the Gerald R. Ford, this number is around 4,500 as of this video, and each of these sailors also need to earn their paycheck. While we cannot estimate the exact costs of each paycheck, it does vary by rank, with the captain or commanding officer usually earning the biggest check each month. Once all the sailors have been loaded onto the vessel, they need to be fed, which can cost quite a bit given the fact that each sailor needs to get at least 3 meals each day, which totals around 500 calories per day. In fact, serving breakfast alone can be tricky with hundreds of pounds of bacon and thousands of eggs being needed to just give each sailor a basic breakfast. You can probably imagine how steak or special meals that include seafood can bump this cost up even higher. Moreover, the vessel is powered by a nuclear reactor, which significantly cuts down on the overall fuel expenditure faced by diesel-powered vessels, such as those used by Russia and the Chinese. However, this doesn't exempt the vessel from having fuel. Almost 100 aircraft can usually be found on or below the flight deck, and each of these fighters needs jet fuel to fly. Since the Gerald R. Ford can carry up to 1.3 million gallons of jet fuel, this sounds like quite a lot, but given the fact that the average FA-18 Super Hornet burns about 1,100 gallons of fuel per hour, you can quickly see why many carrier strike groups often have their own fuel tanker accompanying the vessel. In essence, the most common fighter jet found on aircraft carriers burns about $10,000 to $30,000 worth of fuel in just a single flight mission. But these are just rough estimates, and depending on the number of missions or sorties, this number can quickly get out of hand. Finally, there is also the complex question of ammunition. Not all aircraft carriers have the same weaponry, but judging by the video we made on what it costs to fire Navy weapons, you can quickly see how $1 million can vanish in just a couple of minutes. In essence, a U.S. aircraft carrier is a very expensive toy to have around, costing a whopping $7 million a day. This cost can add a significant burden to the budget of the Navy, which is why many suggest that the USS Gerald R. Ford might be the cheapest ever aircraft carrier to operate. So, how is this possible? The main difference that makes the cost a little cheaper is the introduction of the EMALS, or Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System. Unlike the traditional steam catapults, which use highly pressurized steam that needs to constantly be refilled, the EMALS employs a linear induction motor to launch aircraft using electromagnetic force. This means that there is no need for anything to be refilled, and electric energy stemming from the nuclear reactors is more than enough to launch a wealth of fighter jets into the sky. Moreover, the system is also much smaller and compact, which means it doesn't take up the same space that a steam catapult will traditionally need. Add to this the fact that a smoother launch with fewer vibrations with EMALS reduces the stress placed on the aircraft. This means less damage done to an aircraft when being launched, and not as much time spent being repaired. According to the United States Navy, the introduction of this system by itself will save the Navy up to $4 billion annually, and this is just the start. If you consider that fewer crew members are needed to operate the vessel, it means even more costs can be cut. These costs are not only cut on wages, but also the daily expenses, such as food, or the costs of running the Pyrogenesis Plasma Arc Waste Destruction System, PAWDS, which is used daily to incinerate waste. But unfortunately, it will likely take decades for the Navy to see these savings given the initial price tag of the vessel, which sits at more than $13 billion. One massive question that often comes from this is whether or not it was worth it for the U.S. Navy to build this expensive vessel. And if the Navy has 9 more of these on order, does it even make sense? Or will there be actual savings in the long run? It is important to ask yourself whether there can truly be a price tag put on safety. The United States Navy's intention behind the USS Gerald R. Ford is not only to save costs in the future, but to build a vessel that will immediately strike fear into the hearts of U.S. enemies. The Gerald R. Ford has certainly done that, while also making sure that it would take decades for countries like China and Russia to catch up in terms of technology. But the big problem is that this Ford-class carrier is yet to prove itself in battle. In fact, the vessel has only been deployed in combat simulations, without ever being physically in the presence of battle. Recently, the United States deployed 2 Nimitz-class carriers, the USS Carl Vinson and USS Harry Truman, to the Red Sea. Both these vessels immediately proved their worth in shutting down Houthi operations and crippling its infrastructure in Yemen. Many believe that this could have been the perfect opportunity for the U.S. Navy to have deployed the Gerald R. Ford and perhaps show off just how powerful it might be. But the problem is that aircraft carriers are rarely, if ever, deployed to the front lines. This privilege is mostly reserved for frigates, destroyers, and even submarines. One main reason for the lack of combat seen by aircraft carriers is once again the costs. Since each vessel is a massive investment of resources, the last thing the United States wants to do is to lose one in combat. Now, you might be thinking, why did the U.S. Navy build this carrier if it is merely used as a show of force and to scare off enemies? Well, that is exactly the reason. And much like nuclear warheads, which should never be used, they serve as a form of deterrence to enemy forces. For example, knowing that 1 or maybe 2 carrier strike groups are lurking around the South China Sea, it could be argued that this is the reason why China is yet to invade Taiwan. Finally, aircraft carriers carry fighter jets, which have incredible ranges. This means that a carrier will never have to be in direct contact. They can simply park up a few thousand miles away from the enemy and using its massive aerial firepower, the carrier can wipe out a large metropolitan city without any enemy even seeing it. This, and the fact that it is used in peace missions as a way of intimidating opponents by itself, makes the USS Gerald R. Ford worth every single penny spent by the Navy. But does the Navy really need 9 more? According to various reports, the United States Navy aims to add at least 9 more of these carriers to its fleet. This will be more than $100 billion of taxpayer dollars added to a military-industrial complex that's already worth over $1 trillion. Judging by current U.S. politics and a massive drive to reduce government spending, you are likely to see a major backlash to this idea in the House and Senate. In fact, the United States already operates more aircraft carriers than all other nations combined, and the Nimitz class has still proven its value. By this estimation, it is fair to say that the United States doesn't need 9 more aircraft carriers to continue being the global military superpower. But what do you think about the cost of operating a U.S. aircraft carrier? Is it justified? Does the Navy truly need it? Make sure to let us know in the comments below. Please click on that subscribe button if you are not yet a member of our channel.